I'm Peter Austin. That is the UK's longest pub name, just 2 doors down from the UK's shortest pub name, and this is interesting. Not least the fact that while I have briefly popped down here to the town of Stalybridge in Greater Manchester to see the Q Inn and the old 13th Cheshire Astley Volunteer Rifleman Corps Inn, it was always my intention to present this video here, on a rather bleak stretch of moorland about 9 miles to the east, on the border with West Yorkshire. You see, while there are some truly bizarre pub names right across Britain, the Greater Manchester area seems to have more than its fair share. For instance, just 6 miles north of Stalybridge, there was once a public house by the name of Help the Poor Struggler, a title that takes on a rather grim sense of irony when you realise that the landlord was one Albert Pierpoint, the most prolific hangman of the 20th century, hence Poor Struggler. It's literal gallows humour. But I digress. The reason I've braved the elements out here on Wessendon Moor is to visit the remains of a pub that I used to consider my favourite name of all, and they're just up ahead. Those 2 gateposts and bits of old wall are all that's left of a drinking establishment first opened in the mid-1800s, and while for most of its life it was known as the not overly interesting name of the Isle of Skye Hotel, I was very amused to read on a local history website some years ago that it was briefly known as the Better Than Expectation Inn. I love it. It might as well have been called the Not As Bad As It Looks, or the rated 3.5 stars on Google. Imagine my disappointment then when I discovered whilst researching for this video that there don't appear to be any other sources for the Better Than Expectation name, either online or in local interest books. But no matter, I said to myself, there's plenty more where that came from, or more to the point, not where that came from, but rather from more credible sources, and we're going to look at the most weird and wonderful examples today. But perhaps from the shelter of somewhere I can get a nice pint, you know, the weather's getting worse. So, you're round, I think. Here are some of the strangest pub names in Britain. Oh, much better. One name that's worth a mention right from the off is the Swan With Two Necks, particularly due to the fact that this rather curious example actually appears in multiple places across Britain, often accompanied by signage that really does depict a two-headed swan, as if the buggers weren't already scary enough. Well, the name is actually a corruption of the phrase the Swan With Two Necks, referring to the swan-upping ceremony that's taken place annually on London's River Thames for hundreds of years. By way of this tradition, the city's vintners and dyers livery companies were permitted by the Crown to claim ownership of a number of mute swans on the river by catching them and marking their beaks with little carved notches. In the case of the Vintners Company, their particular mark was 2 such notches, or nicks, hence the phrase, the Swan With Two Necks. Crown ownership only actually applies on the River Thames, not the rest of the country, and specifically refers to just mute swans. The idea that the king owns every single swan in the country is one of those false facts that proliferate so easily in this age of misinformation. A bit like that Better Than Expectation Inn misnomer. But then again, the internet can be just as problematic when it's telling the truth, namely when it's handing out your personal information to anyone who wants it. And that's why I'm so glad that today's video is sponsored by Incogni. If you've ever been as conceited as me as to Google your own name, you may well have discovered that your personal details are listed on all manner of websites you've never even heard of. A lot of this data is far more personal than you might expect as well. Insurance companies might access health information. Employers could delve into the details of your job history and professional licenses. And there's even a booming trade in your political affiliations, religious beliefs, and even the number of children you've got. Fortunately, Incogni can help with that by automatically instructing hundreds of online directories, commercial databases, and people search services to remove your details, which not only leads to you receiving less spam, but also protects you from cybercriminals, fraudsters, and general snoopers. I personally owe it to Incogni for taking down an old home address of mine, which is not the kind of thing you want floating around out there when you're a YouTube content creator. And better yet, if you discover discover anything online that isn't covered by Incogni's automated process, the custom removals feature included in their unlimited plan allows you to submit almost any link where your info appears to be handled by a dedicated privacy expert. It's an incredibly powerful feature that truly allows you to disappear from the web. In fact, you've no reason not to at least give it a try, because using the code Peter Austin at the link in the description, you'll get 60% off your annual plan, and there's also a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not satisfied, so it's absolutely no risk. You can cancel any time. Remember, they can't harm you if they can't find you. Unless they're lying to you about who owns swans on the internet. Incogni can't help you with that. But anyway, back to the pubs. While we're on the subject of swans, there is one other pub name that we should talk about before we move on. An establishment in Stratford-upon-Avon that claims to be the only pub in the country licensed under two names. The Black Swan, or the rather playful alternative, the Dirty Duck. Okay, not that weird, but the reason I mention it is it's a great segue into another watering hole, this time in London's Bishopsgate, that in 1814 changed its name from the Old Jerusalem to Dirty Dick's. Alright, pipe down at the back there, jeez. Dirty Dick was actually the nickname given to an English merchant, Nathaniel Bentley, who's reputed to have become incredibly miserly in his 30s and stopped cleaning himself or his shop. It's said that when Bentley moved out of his property, aged 69, the landlord of the nearby Old Jerusalem public house purchased some of its contents as display items, including dead animals that had crawled away and died in forgotten corners where they'd been naturally mummified. Lovely. The pub eventually changed its name to match the decor and still goes by Dirty Dick's today. And hey, just while some of you are still giggling, I may as well tell you about this old Cumbrian boozer, which until relatively recently was known as the Legend of Oily Johnnies. Although, again, it's not quite as naughty as it sounds. Apparently, an ex-landlord, Johnny, used to also sell paraffin oil on the premises, hence the name. Sorry if you were hoping for something a bit racier. An old pub name that was once the longest in London also owes its name to an ex-landlord, actually. In a time when it was becoming far less common for the aristocracy to have domestic servants running on foot ahead of their horse and coach in order to clear the way, one such servant retired from his position and went on to open a pub in Mayfair by the really rather odd name of I Am the Only Running Footman, referring to his former job. The name was later shortened to The Running Footman and now just The Footman, but that original first-person perspective pub name is still remembered as one of the most unusual in British history. Weird perspective aside though, occupational names like that are actually very commonplace in pub branding right across the country, either because of the landlord's career history or otherwise some local industry that most of the regulars were employed in. Many of these appear in a whole host of towns and villages, like the Miner's Arms or the Fisherman's Rest, but there are some far more unusual ones. In Atherton, again in Greater Manchester, local metalworkers drank at the Jolly Nailer. Alright, sure. In Leeds, there is still a Chemic Tavern, once frequented by the staff of a former chemical works that produced sulfuric acid. I think I probably would have brought my own glass to that one. And similarly, a Nunhead pub, established in the 1870s, close to what was then a fireworks factory, was called the Pyrotechnists' Arms. Now, that's very unusual. Whatever your line of work, though, in 20th century Portsmouth, after stopping off at a particular Inland Revenue office to hand over some of your hard-earned wages, you could stop on the way home for a pint at the Jolly Taxpayer, so named because of that nearby government building. Other name origins are far less clear-cut, though. Several theories can be found, for example, for a Lincolnshire pub by the name of My Father's Moustache. But an article by the Sky History Channel claims that this was simply a fun name chosen by the children of its mustachioed landlord. Seems pretty plausible, but probably further citation needed. Similarly, the Bucket of Blood in Cornwall might owe its name to local red-coloured water caused by runoff from nearby tin mines, but there's also a legend about a pail full of blood being pulled up from a well in the grounds after someone dumped the body of a murdered private customs officer down there. Presumably the culprit was not a jolly taxpayer. The most confusing of all, though, has to be "the case is altered," which weirdly appears in several different places around the country, but always with a different explanation, seemingly. Some people put it down to some sort of significant change in circumstance of an old landlord, which apparently warranted changing the name of the pub, while others suggest various linguistic corruptions, like we had with the Swan With Two Necks. For example, one spurious claim is that soldiers returning from the Napoleonic Wars brought home the phrase Casa de Saltar, or jumping house, allegedly taken from the name of some continental establishment where there was a lot of dancing, hence the name jumping house, but this is almost certainly not true. There was a 1609 play called The Case is Altered, and this might have inspired at least some instances of the pub name, but we really can't be sure about any of them, to be honest. That being said, there are some other strangely named alehouses that really do owe their title to a work of literature. The Cat and Custard Pot in the Cotswolds was allegedly named for a fictional festival in the 1843 novel Handley Cross. The Lasse Gowrie, another Manchester establishment, is said to be named after its Scottish landlord's favourite poem by Lady Carolina Nairn, and the former Jabez Clegg pub, which was also in central Manchester, took its name from the lead character of the 1876 absolute tome that is The Manchester Man. He's in here somewhere. There you go, Jabez Clegg. You don't meet many of those nowadays, do you? Which sort of brings us back to the city we started in, actually. I certainly hope there was at least one weird pub name in this selection that you've not encountered before, but either way, thanks for watching right to the end. Always a gamble to click on a video like this, isn't it? But hopefully it was actually better than expectation. I've been Peter Austin, and that was interesting. Thanks again to Incogni for sponsoring this video. Remember, you can get 60% off an annual plan with a 30-day money-back guarantee by following the link in the description and using the code PETERAUSTIN.